Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Terry Tennans. I serve as CEO of SAFE. It's really good to have you watching this. If you're watching this live or recorded at a later time, you're very welcome. I'm delighted to have with us a number of people. To my beside me, we've got Claire Day, the Administration Manager of SAFE. And we've also got our first Vice President to be, Ross Hickton. Welcome, Ross. And I'm really delighted to have Philip LeShirley, who's a Senior Trading Standards Specialist from Buckingham and Surrey Trading Standards. Philip has done some training with SAFE's quality assurance assessors, and we really were upskilled by him last November. And delighted to have you here, Philip. So you're going to lead us through a number of thoughts and slides over the next 20 or so minutes. And then we'll bring Claire and Ross back in.
Okay, thank you very much, Terry, and good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to be with you today. My name's Phil LeShirley, and the session today is around complaints and how to diffuse and handle them. I work for Buckinghamshire and Surrey Trading Standards. We are in partnership with SAFE to deliver advice to you members, which, if followed, means that we would block any enforcement action proposed against you by other authorities that took a different view. So it's very, very powerful partnership, and we've already been doing some great stuff on things like terms and conditions, which we'll share with you shortly. In my spare time, I'm the product safety advisor for Rossborough, and I've done a number of different training bits for the government over the years. So I work with a number of very big companies, as you can see, and I can promise you that complaints are a key part of that. And what I'm going to try and bring out from today is the value that complaints can bring, as well as some of the tips for dealing with them. Okay, so if we think about the psychology of complaining, well, people complain, when they feel things haven't gone the way that they expected them to. I think that's fair to say, isn't it? And what's really important for you as members is to remember that pretty much every time you're dealing with a complainant, they are normally a vulnerable consumer. They're vulnerable in the sense that, whilst they might be a barrister normally, if you lose a loved one, you are at that time, almost universally vulnerable. So it's very difficult, we recognise, for you as members to deal with that, because on the one hand, you've got the law and you've got your terms and conditions, and on the other hand, you've got someone before you who's vulnerable. And Terry and I have discussed, over the last few weeks about, are we still not a society of complainers? Because, typically, in the past, if we had a problem with a restaurant, if they overcharged us for wine, we as Brits would tend not to make a scene, but we'd go home and stew. And then, if we were overcharged for the wine, for example, we would then go home and complain to trading standards rather than say something at the time. Now, post-COVID, that's changed quite a bit, I think, and you will get people more willing to complain, not only at the time, but to people like SAFE and to you and to us as well. And so it's really important, really, to just understand what complainants want. And I can promise you what all complainants want is two very simple things. First of all, they want to feel like they've been listened to, okay? They want to feel like someone recognises the fact that they are saying that they've been impacted by what's happened, and that they are either upset or aggrieved or, annoyed or whatever. And that's really, really important. And the second is that they want to see some action taken as a result of their complaint. And that the key to this is that doesn't necessarily have to be the action that they initially wanted you to take. Now, as a trading standards officer, I've had people complaining about other businesses for 30 odd years to me now, and they often say, well, I've got a problem with this shoe shop, I want you to shut them down, I want you to take them to court, all the rest of it. Now, clearly that's not going to happen. But if you say to them, okay, well, I will look into this, I will raise this with them if it's appropriate, and I promise to come back to you, that's action, right? So it's not necessarily what they wanted to happen, but it's something. So if you can demonstrate they've been listened to and demonstrate that some action has happened as a result of their complaint, then they are far more likely to go away feeling, like they've been listened to, not feeling that they've been dismissed. So what you should do when you receive a complaint, well, take ownership of it. Okay, I'm John Smith. I'm the complaints manager for the directors. I'm going to be dealing with your complaint. Okay, deal with it in a timely manner. Don't let it drag on, because the longer you drag on, the more likely the complaint is likely to be dissatisfied with the outcome. And under promise and over deliver. That's really, really important and very simple to achieve. Even if it's just things like, okay, well, I promise you, Mrs. Smith, I'm gonna ring you back with the outcome by Friday. And if you ring Mrs. Smith back by Wednesday instead of Friday, irrespective of the outcome, you've over delivered, because she was expecting it by Friday. Her expectations were there. You've been quicker than that, so already you've over delivered on what you said you would do. And follow up. If they were going to receive some money back, we'll make sure they got it back. Not difficult. And get some feedback as well on the process. You want feedback on your services, you should get feedback on the complaint as well. And what should you do? Well, you should always treat all complainants the same. And I know that's difficult, and I know that's a challenge, but you really do need to look at this stuff through the lens of, okay, well, we treat everybody the same that has a complaint, irrespective of what they're complaining about, irrespective of what we think the outcome's going to be. Let them know and feel that their complaint is important, because it is, and thank them for their complaint. Understand how valuable complaints are. Now, back to the Coca-Colas and the Shells. I'm not going to divulge any sensitive, information, but I can promise you that they're smart enough to know that consumers are your eyes and ears out there, and can help you avoid problems with other customers. So, if you're outsourcing the cars that you use, and the firm sends over a dirty car, you want to hear about that. Right? You want that complaint to come in, because, if that complaint hadn't come in, that firm would have kept sending dirty cars out, and you would have lots of consumers who were unhappy with that. And what happens is, they might not have complained, but they might not have used you again. They might not have recommended you again. So that complaint is very, very valuable to you, as is things like rude staff. You can't be everywhere all the time. If you've got a new member of staff, they're out there facing your customers, being offhand, being discourteous or whatever, you want to know about it. That's absolutely, you want to know about that. So, understand how valuable complaints are. But, and there is a but here, as with everything, there's also, the realms of unacceptable behavior. And sometimes a complainant can become unreasonable. And typically, we see that as being things like swearing, or, being rude, or personal attacks on staff, or whatever. Now, what we encourage you to do is set within your business what we call the line of unacceptable behavior, and stick to it. So for some businesses, they will allow consumers to swear in a conversation if they're frustrated, but won't allow the consumer to swear at the staff member, right? So you can understand the difference there. Other businesses will say, look, we don't accept any swearing whatsoever. And, when you got the army, good luck, being in Afghanistan and, wanting to down rifles because, you're hearing bad language. So it's always tempered to the different type of organization it is. And sometimes that line is different for some staff. So, for us over 50s, that might be very different to the line for the brand new member of staff who's fresh, a female fresh out of university, remember that you've got a duty of care to your staff. But keep coming back to this thing that your customers are vulnerable. And I'd like you to sort of remember this very, very, very clearly. Just because they're right, it doesn't mean that they can behave how they want to, right? Excuse me. Just because someone holds the moral high ground or the legal, right zone, for want of a better word, doesn't mean that gives them the right to swear. Doesn't mean that gives them the right to be rude. And so my tip in this space is try and orchestrate ways to cool off. If you're speaking to someone on the phone, you can see it going out there. Just say, look, what I'm going to do, Mr. Smith, is I'm going to go away now and do a bit of research into this. I'm going to ring you back in 15 minutes, okay? And we all know in our personal lives and our professional lives that just that little bit of a break can be really, really, really powerful in just diffusing a situation. Might be 15 minutes, might be a day. Let them sleep on it. Ring them back the next morning. Guarantee you, someone's not going to pick up the phone and start that argument where it left off. So there are some phrases to avoid as well. Calm down being the first one. Now, we all understand why you want to say calm down. Trust me, you never want to say that when you're dealing with an irate complainant, because it's like throwing petrol onto a fire. They don't want to be told to calm down. They want you to sort their problem out. And this is one that I was guilty of for so many years, actually. And that's by saying, I hear what you say. I hear what you say. I hear what you say. Well, what that actually does is it negates what they have just said. Everyone, unless they've got problems with their hearing, hears what everyone else says. So it's almost like saying, yes, you said that, but it doesn't really mean anything because we're going to move on to what I want to say now. So avoid that. And I've got a lot of colleagues in the police, and I can promise you, never, ever, ever raise your voice, because if you do, they'll raise their voice to match yours, or they will feel that you're attacking them, or both. So I know it's difficult, and I'm not saying at all consumers are easy people to deal with, because they're not, but, they're my top 3 tips there, okay? Now, for you owners on the call, bit of soul searching here, I guess. If you're being completely honest with yourselves, do you act defensively when someone makes a complaint against either you or your business? Because you're the ones that put the blood, sweat, and tears into building your very successful, very good businesses. It's difficult when someone then comes in and criticizes that. So do you, is that a trigger for you? And is it a trigger for you when you're seeing a staff member being complained to? Because sometimes, we can rush to the defense of a staff member, even though A, they don't feel like they need saving, and B, the consumer making the complaint has got a completely valid point. So just have a think about that, and do you strongly and vocally defend your staff? It's just have a think about it. And where does this come from? Well, it comes from the place that you care. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing you care. It's how you deal with that. And my top tip in this space is just, difficult as it is, and trust me, I know it's difficult, don't let it ever become personal, because no one sets out to make a complaint thinking, I'm going to make this a personal attack on this person. What they go out thinking, look, I feel aggrieved. This has not gone right. I'm going to make a complaint. So it's not a personal attack against you. Please don't take it as such. Now, we know that third parties can be involved. So it can be a celebrant, officiant. They could be bad. The celebrant or officiant could be bad. Rented cars could be dirty. What if the celebrant or florist is chosen by the family? Well, if the family insists on a celebrant or florist and they're no good, well, then they don't have a claim against you. Simple as that. What if the name of the family member is misspelled, or the makeup is not done properly? Well, that is, if these are third parties doing it, it's very much then down to what measures did you put in place when you drew up the contract? Did you get this precise stuff in writing, and did you then forward that to the third party with explicit instruction. The classic being what needs to be on the cake. Where we can use complaints here is it informs our choices of third parties. So, if you have received 3 complaints about dirty cars from this one place that's supplying your cars, that's your cue to choose someone else. It's quite simple. So complaints in this space, whilst it might be about what someone else is doing, doesn't mean that you shouldn't take action. Now, we know coroners and GPs can cause delays. This can lead to less chance for families to see the deceased, and decay sets in. Again, in this space, just be proactive. Let the consumer know from the outset that these are possibilities, not definite, but say, look, if all goes to plan, this is how it's going to happen. But just be aware there might be some delays with the coroner. Just be aware there are horrific delays with our local GPs. We've experienced them. And if you tell them, they can't blame you for not telling them. They can't blame you for the fact that something's happened if you told them in advance, okay? So little bits like that about being proactive are so important, and you'll see that that's the theme of my presentation today. So we've reached the point where we should be breaking down the complaints that we receive into 3 very discrete categories. The first one being complaint that's completely about you and stuff that's under your control. So the funeral director was rude. Well, the buck stops with you. There's no one else that can is involved. It doesn't mean it's right. It just means that's a complaint that's about an issue that's under your control, and we need to recognise that. The second type of complaint is where we have some control over the issue. A staff member, a third party. And the third type of complaint is issues where we don't have any control over it. Coroners, GPs. It's going to be snowing, we're told. Well, if it's snowing and the roads are closed to the place where the ceremony is going to be taking place, there's no one in the world that's going to argue that that's your fault. But just be clear from the outset what the procedure is for the consumer. The consumer should have no surprises when they're engaging with you. They should know exactly what they should be able to do if they've got a complaint against you. They should know exactly what should happen if there's a delay with the coroners, GPs, or with the weather. And they should understand what the interrelationship between you and the third parties are, and what to expect in that space. So my top tips: have a complaints process or procedure written down and train your staff on it. Now, we know that SAFE provides you with a template for that. We are working with SAFE as part of the partnership that I mentioned earlier to you on looking at that and seeing if that can be reissued to you, because we know that's a great thing. Share it with all customers in advance. There's never a customer that's going to be given the contract, the fees, and a complaints procedure and think, oh, well, I'm not going to use this lot. They've told me how to complain. They're going to thank you for it, because it's going to be one less thing for them to do if they do need to complain. Instead of having to find out how to do it, all that stuff's in front of them. And appoint a complaints manager. Now, that does not mean recruit a new member of staff. It just means appoint someone within your organization, and there might just be 4 of you. Have one of you wear the hat of complaints manager. That's really important. And crucially, have a different member of staff deal with the complaint than the one being complained about. Cannot stress that enough. And look at the complaints that you've received on a monthly basis. Do this yourself. The complaints manager should do a report ideally, and do it as a team. Look for trends. If you got 3 complaints about the wrong song being played, well, that's a trend. And if it's in the same place, well, then that's your cue to go and have a chat with them. Go and have a word with them. Do we really need to not go there anymore, or can we just talk to them? Okay, well, for the first time in the history of my life, I've finished on time. So Terry was very worried I'd be, as normal, waffling on till about 3:55. So I'm going to bring in Ross, Terry, and Claire. We asked you for some of your practical examples because this only ever makes sense when we're talking about real life stuff. You've been very helpful with that. So let's now go through some of the practical examples, and I'm going to bring in Ross and Claire and Terry as well. Okay. So the first one is that the family felt that the pallbearers struggled to carry the coffin and lift it to shoulder height. The coffin slipped from their hands and nearly hit the ground. So I'm getting a bit of feedback, guys. I don't know whose end that is. So my take on this is it shouldn't be a secret what the weight of the deceased is. From that should be ascertained at the point the contract was formed. From that, the number of pallbearers should be calculated because there's a cost associated with them. But that's just me and my naivety. So, Ross, if that came across your desk, would you agree? Or
yeah, I mean, you take a view on how many staff are needed to carry the coffin safely. Unfortunately, this situation shouldn't happen, but I'm assuming it has as it's hit safe with a complaint. So, I mean, it's happened. The funeral's taken place. At the end of the day, the funeral director in this situation should sincerely apologise and ensure that he or she has got a procedure in place for the future so it doesn't happen, and that extra training is carried out for their staff.
Yeah, thank you. Terry and Claire, anything to add?
No, nothing to add.
Okay, thank you. So the next one is the family asked for a song to be played at the service and the wrong one was played. Well, let's deal with that one first of all. Again, I just think this comes back to being proactive in terms of when we form the contract, what flowers are we going to have, what songs are we going to play, what version of that song, get it in writing. I think that, if it's in writing from the outset, there should be very little scope for, that being got wrong later on. But I'd be interested in how, if that wasn't, well, how was that relayed to the funeral director? Was it, the one of the family members, just as they were leaving, shouting across the car park to a junior member of staff, "Oh yeah, by the way, we want Candle in the Wind," and that didn't get fed back. So, Ross, would you agree with that? Or?
Yeah, exactly the same. Make sure everything's in writing, make sure everything's confirmed in the days leading up to the funeral to ensure it is the service that the family wanted.
Yeah, I think so. Terry, I was going to say Terry and June then. That's awful, isn't it? Terry and Claire.
Yeah, we both concur with Ross. It's just making sure everything is documented.
Yeah, and that's the same for the poems. Now, this is an interesting one. The family felt that the celebrant's clothes were scruffy and full of pet hair. Now, the first thing with this is not one where you could argue against it, right? So if they're saying it was scruffy and full of pet hair, you've got to accept that that's their perception. But what's interesting to me is, well, did they ask for that celebrant? Or was it one that the member supplied? Now, if it's one that the member supplied, I think it then goes into, well, it's happened now. There might be a breach. I'm not sure quite to what extent there was a breach there, but I definitely feel it would be then a conversation with that celebrant to say, look, we like using you. The words you say are great. However, we've had some feedback about your appearance. Where do we go? If they turn around and say, look, love my pet hair or not, then we might start using a different celebrant. But, Ross, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, fully agree. Feedback to the celebrant. I mean, I've personally had this fairly recently with a funeral I actually conducted where the family requested a certain church. The vicar of the church decided to hand the funeral over to her understudy who took the service. Yet the vicar of the church was sort of sat at the front keeping an eye on things. And the family commented afterwards how unprofessional she looked and actually asked me who she was and why she was sat at the front of the church. So in that situation, I went back to the vicar, passed on their comments and fed it back to the parish office, and they issued a very subtle apology. Again, it's just about being proactive and having that conversation to ensure it does not happen again.
Yeah. Would you agree, Terry?
Makes sense. I mean, there are codes of practice. Some celebrants belong to associations, and you can make a complaint to them if they're a humanist. There's the Association of Independent Celebrants, and there'll be others that they belong to, or in this case, to the church.
Yeah. And it's very difficult. We all know, having worked in offices and with other people, things like people's attire, smell, that sort of thing, very, very difficult to deal with. The bottom line is this is a service that's being provided by the member if it is the celebrant that you provided. So they're representing you. And that's the lens through which I would look at. That celebrant is representing you. And so it'd be a conversation with them. Look, do you want to represent us anymore? If so, we can't have this. So the funeral director was not being flexible enough with letting the family view the deceased. The family wanted out of hours or weekends due to family living a distance away. Now, I was fascinated by this one, and I have a very clear view on it. And I think it's 100% down to how the conversations went when they were drawing up the paperwork, when they were sitting down talking about how this is going to go. Because what should have happened, in my view, is the funeral director should have been very clear about the hours during which the deceased is going to be able to be viewed, and the hours that they're not going to be able to be viewed, and whether they're open at weekends or not. And I just think that that's a very, very binary conversation to have at that time. Now, the family is either then going to accept that in writing, everyone signs, or they're going to say, look, this isn't working for us. We live 2 hours away. We need out of hours access. We're going to have to go somewhere else that's going to afford us that. Now, Ross, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. Have that upfront conversation. If the family haven't asked the question, make them aware. One step further would be to ensure that you have your clear opening hours around viewing of a loved one on your website and on your literature, so the family can make that decision even before they appoint you as the funeral director, to ensure they are using a company which does out of normal office hours viewings and visitations.
Yeah. I agree. Terry, Claire?
No.
Nothing to add?
No.
I mean, I think in this case, what's happened is the family have just come up with, and let's not forget, they're vulnerable, right? So let's not forget that. But I just think in this case, they've just come up with their perception of what's going to happen. They've assumed, right, well, we're all these hours away, but we'll be able to go on Saturday mornings. It won't be a problem. We'll be able to go late at night if we go after work. And I just think that they've assumed that. And because it's not been clear that that is an unrealistic expectation, remember this managing expectations thing? I just think there's been a disconnect between what always happens, which is the opening times, and what they thought was going to happen. And the other thing that's challenging for you as members is you're dealing with consumers. You do this stuff every day, and you're brilliant at it. Consumers do this super, super, super rarely, thankfully. It's a completely alien thing to go through, the being part of a funeral that you're organising. It happens, throughout our lives, but it certainly doesn't happen every year, for example. So it's really important to remember there's a disconnect between what they think is going to be reasonable and what the reality is. Okay. So the family was not happy, as they were told initially there would be four bearers to carry the coffin, but actually 6 were used on the day, and we're not happy with the extra charges. Now, we've touched on this earlier. Again, I do maintain that it as part of the negotiations at the outset. We should be finding out what the approximate weight of the deceased is, because that is going to have an effect on, things like size of the coffin and how many bearers are going to be needed. And from that, it may well be that the calculation is, well, we're going to need 6. And that's fine. And the consumer would need to accept that. But it's not acceptable to say, well, we're going to need 4. And on the day, we need 6. And by the way, Mrs. Smith, that's an extra 500 quid you owe us. Now, Ross, what's your view on that?
Yeah, completely agree. It goes back to the point on one of the initial slides where, run through the arrangements in the days leading up to the funeral with the client to make sure they understand exactly what's happening on the day, so there's no room for error.
Yeah, I agree, and I think this is something that one needs to keep coming back to, isn't it? So we agree for 4 bearers. We remind them 2 days before it's going to be 4 bearers. We maybe remind them, the day before it's going to be 4 bearers, and here it's going to be these 4 sort of thing. But I do maintain that the number of bearers needs to be calculated and agreed, because there's going to be a cost associated with that at the point where the contract is formed. Would you agree? Or?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, and Terry and Claire, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. It's all about communication, and and making sure that the families are aware. I mean, with regards to the CMA price list as well, any additional charges should be on their additional price list anyway. So that information should be discussed right from the arrangements, and therefore you wouldn't be in this position.
And this is difficult because we understand at Trading Standards the reasons why this stuff happens. Okay. And we're not looking at this through the lens of, well, this must be a really bad member or just a business that's just adding stuff on. The builder that says, oh, I need more tiles, and it's going to be another £1,000. That sort of thing. But the perception from the consumer is, well, we're really vulnerable. We're now here, and we're being told that we got to pay more. Didn't agree to it, and we got no choice, right? So reality and perception, 2 different things, and that's the sort of thing, as we know, that leads to complaints. The funeral director did not leave enough time to get to the crematorium for service, so everyone had to rush to get to the service. Now, I was thinking about this, and I thought, well, we don't have all the information here, so it might be that there might have been a water mains leak in town, and all traffic got delayed by half hour wherever it was going. So what would normally be a 10-minute journey actually took 40 minutes, and everyone was rushed, right? But if that's not the case, this is back down to, well, this is something under our control. Well, yes, because you planned it, mate, and clearly you haven't planned it with enough time. So, Ross?
Yeah, I agree. But at other times, you arrive at the family's house with a cortege, and there's hundreds of people there, hundreds of flowers to load onto the fleet, and you can't plan for that because you don't know until you arrive at the time. So, yes, it does happen occasionally, but there are ways and means to sort of get ahead of the game by asking people to make the way to the crematorium sooner to get ready, or to perhaps take a quicker route to get to the crematorium on time. Ring ahead, say you're running late, see if the service can start a bit later. Be proactive.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think, well, if there's an indication from the family side that there's going to be hundreds of people, can't we ask them to let us know that? And can't we have the conversation from the outset? Well, how many people are you envisaging coming? They're never going to know fully. There's a big difference between 5 people coming and 500 people coming, isn't there? And it's very unfair for a funeral director to have to deal with 500 people that they didn't know were coming when they thought it was going to be a reasonable number. Terry and Claire?
I suppose yes and no. I mean, I'm not a practicing funeral director, so I haven't been put in that position. But I think when you're dealing with certain sort of types of families, it can be very difficult to sort of, you know, ascertain that. But, you know, it is a fair conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I'm noticing that we're getting some very good stuff in the chat, so I want to make sure that we get enough time for that. So next one is deceased was embalmed and the family did not request this. This has caused much upset within the family. Now, again, I think this just comes back down to the stuff that's laid out and agreed at the time that the contract's formed. Now, it might be that every deceased that comes through this funeral directors is embalmed, and that's just what we do. And because the family didn't ask and assumed it would be something else, and this thing about assuming, I think, is really important in these spaces because consumers aren't doing this stuff regularly. I think that is something that's going to obviously cause upset. And again, I think that's something of just laying out, okay, this is now what's going to happen. You know, Mrs. Smith's going to be held with us. She's going to be embalmed. She's going to have makeup on, and we've been given a picture to try and, you know, match that. She's going to be dressed with these clothes, all that sort of stuff. And just laying that out and getting the family to agree to it, input into it, feel like they've got a voice in that, I think is really important. And for it not to then be it shouldn't then be a surprise at the other end. Ross?
Yeah, I agree. But ultimately, you know, a family should be given written consent to that funeral director for the embalming to take place on their loved one. The client would sign a document, and we would like to hope are given a piece of literature around embalming so they fully understand what the process is.
Okay.
On the back of that, you know, it's the funeral director's decision at times that if there's going to be a delay for the funeral, open coffin or casket on the day of the funeral, where embalming would be advised and would be recommended. But again, that should be done with written consent, managing expectations.
Yeah, I think so. So not only is it going to happen, but this is what it entails. Yeah, and so if they've got a leaflet in their hand and they've signed to say it's going to happen, again, they can't complain when they've been told. And you know, a leaflet in their hand to talking about embalming is pretty good evidence that, you know, there's an indication that the body will be embalmed. Terry and Claire.
Certainly in SAFE, the Mortuaries Committee is developing a template for members to get a signature authorising embalming and also explaining what embalming is. So that's a resource that's soon to come to our membership.
Okay, thank you. So this one is the ashes were given to the wrong person. The funeral was arranged by the deceased wife, and she instructed that no one else was to collect the ashes. Funeral director gave the ashes to the son of the deceased. Now, the first thing I'm going to say in this space is this is very difficult, and I feel your pain as members in this. The contract is between yourselves and the deceased wife, so it's she that determines how this stuff works. But you know, I'd be interested in how she instructed. Did she, you know, in passing, just ask a junior member of staff to say, look, and by the way, no one's to collect them apart from me, or was it very explicitly laid out in the contract that it was her that was going to collect them, or she wanted them delivered to her, or whatever? Because if it was, then I think that she's got a pretty strong complaint about them being given to the deceased. If your terms and conditions are, well, you know, once the ashes are available, they'll be given to members of the family. It might just be this thing about what she assumed was going to happen to what was actually going to happen. Ross?
Yeah, I agree. And also on top of that, obviously the wife would have signed the cremation form 1, which states on the last page that she is to collect the cremated remains and receive them from the funeral director You know, unfortunately, without other clear instruction, the funeral directors failed in this instance, and lack of checking the file and procedure.
Okay. And Terry and Claire?
What we, Professor Heather Conway did write a document that is on SAFE's website about who owns the ashes and what happens. What we can do is we have got further clarification that she provided at the last education day. So what we can do is when we email this out, we can email this out to those that are attending as well, which may help.
I think the Law Commission are on their 13th chapter of revising laws around funeral, including ashes. So this is something that may change in the coming few years.
Yeah, and you know, I go back to what I said earlier. This stuff is difficult. You know, no one is suggesting that a funeral director is going to give the ashes to the wrong person out of spite, malice, ignorance, whatever. It's a mistake, isn't it? It's a genuine mistake. What we got to look at this is through the lens of the wife, who is not only bereaved but you know, very vulnerable, very difficult time, and then to turn up to collect the ashes and being told that they've been given to the son is not good. And what we don't know, and we don't want to know, is the family dynamics as well. Son might be estranged, you know, there might be all sorts of bits going on there. So I think that clarity, Claire, I think would be helpful if you could share that with everyone. So funeral director took a deceased into their care. Client says that he did not authorise this, but the hospital said that the client gave authorisation of this. Now, I mentioned earlier that we are giving advice to SAFE members, which, if followed, we will block any enforcement action proposed by other authorities that don't agree. This is a subject that has come up, which we are currently providing advice on, if that helps you. And Claire and Terry will be rolling that out to you in due course. I mean, for me, this is the ultimate he said, she said type argument, isn't it? But the bottom line is there should be paperwork to support all of this. And where there isn't paperwork, we should get clarity. So there should be paperwork from the hospital to the member. There also should be paperwork from the client to the hospital. And if there isn't, I think before the member takes possession of the deceased, they should ask for something in writing just to say, look, are you happy for this to happen? Now, I know that isn't easy, but having this type of conversation afterwards isn't easy either. And so that would be my take on it. Ross, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, it is a difficult situation when this does happen, but I would suggest some form of release form, either that the hospital require or an internal one, as a member, as a funeral director, when doing the arrangements, have them sign a deceased release form to be taken to the hospital to release that deceased into your care, and have a caveat on there which states that if you are not responsible, yet you're signing this form, that the future complaint cannot be held with the funeral director if you're misleading the funeral director or the hospital. Nobody owns a deceased. It's whoever's willing to take responsibility to care for that deceased and pay the funeral director's invoice and apply for the burial or cremation. So again, it goes back to the paperwork trail.
Terry and Claire?
Yeah, I mean, I think the hospital release form is quite important. If they're authorising because of the information they've received, you've got a paper trail to make a claim, you know, for transport. But yeah, it's a tricky one. And, you know, we recognise getting paperwork at this time, it could be the middle of the night. That's not going to happen.
I agree. And also, back to this thing about the lens through which we're looking at this. This is a vulnerable consumer. They might not remember what they said. And Lord knows I've been there. But I definitely feel that, you know, where there is an absence of clarity, we should proactively try to create that clarity. yes, this stuff is middle of the night stuff, but couldn't it wait till the morning? You know, I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm just asking that as a general question. We would rather have clarity from everyone's side about, okay, who wants what to happen where, rather than stuff to happen and then us be reacting to it. The whole thing with complaints, the whole thing about all of this stuff is to be as proactive as possible so we can avoid it. And the good thing is I can see the chat filling up with some good stuff. So I'm going to rattle through these last two. Wrong coffin colour was supplied to the family. Again, this is down to what was agreed at the time and paid for. If it is identified that whilst paid for and agreed, that colour coffin is no longer available, well, then that needs to be a conversation that needs to take place immediately with the complainant to say, look, what we agreed on for reasons of supply chain, whatever, we're not able to supply. Here are your other options. Okay, they shouldn't find out about it on the day. In other words, and the funeral director's attitude was rude and unprofessional when dealing with the client and the arrangements. Well, again, you're not going to be able to persuade anyone that actually you weren't rude and unprofessional, because it's their perception and their complaint. What you can do, though, is get a third party officer, say that again, get a different member of your team to deal with it, because they'll know you, they'll be able to bring a bit of balance into this, and they'll be able to look at it a bit more objectively. Because if you get a complaint saying you're rude, you the first thing you're going to do is say, no, I wasn't. And then you're going to start that again, and before you know it, the complainant is saying, well, the guy's been rude to me again. So putting some distance between you two is really helpful there. Ross, this must come up. What's your view?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. You know, bespoke coffins are very popular these days, colourful, printed, personalised. Give the family a proof. Make sure they see exactly what they're going to be receiving on the day, or prior to the viewing. Managing expectations.
And on the unprofessional and rude bit,
yeah, it's difficult. I mean, it goes back to he said, she said kind of a situation. We'd like to hope all our members and funeral directors are professional at all times, but sometimes what a client may deem as unprofessional is not. It's a difficult one. There's no right or wrong reason to it. It's just managing a complaint when it comes in.
Terry?
I think Claire's got some interesting stats to share.
So looking back at the complaints we've received in 2022 and 2023, the majority were because of unprofessional behaviour. So it just goes to show, it is a he said, she said, but, depending on what is being discussed, it is still a high level of complaint.
Don't forget, just because it's he said, she said, doesn't mean they're not right.
No, exactly.
And I go back to the thing that I said before, that, these are not people that are operating at full capacity. You think about it in terms of an iPhone, we're all on 100% normally. If we're vulnerable, we're down to sort of 10, 15% sometimes. So our ability to deal with normal interactions isn't the same as it is normally. So whilst a conversation, like the one we're having at the moment might be fine, it might be very challenging for someone that's vulnerable and struggling. So just think about it in those terms. And then the last one is the client gave the funeral director instructions not to let anyone view the deceased. Funeral director then let the stepdaughter interview. I think that's the same as the Ashes one, really, unless you've got any other views, Ross.
No, the procedure at the end of the day, following instruction correctly.
And Terry and Claire?
Yep, agree.
Yeah.
Right. Well, for the first time ever again, one of my presentations has actually generated some very, very good conversation points. So Terry, I don't know how you want to address these.
Let's begin the chat. Kit started the sort of questions and the points with just a helpful point about it's probably easier dealing with third parties. Dealing with the family at the situation is more challenging. It'd be interesting to hear what members think. There is the question about dealing with a family face-to-face as opposed to on a telephone. Dealing with the family actually with the funeral on the go. I'll be interested in what, how the dynamics of those contexts affect how you deal with them. Ross, I mean, I don't know if you've got anything a nugget for us on that.
Dealing with a complaint while a funeral's taking place. I mean, if the complaint is around the funeral arranger or the funeral director, I would look to have another member of staff, senior member of staff, or a director of the business fully take over the arrangements, maybe do the arrangements again, try and restart the full procedure from start to finish, clarify everything in minute detail, ensure every step of the way the family have everything in writing, they fully understand what's going on, and then obviously on the day of the funeral, conduct it yourself if you're able to, follow it through, follow the family up a week later, make sure they were happy with everything, and then take it from there.
I mean, I would agree, and just think about how you would normally deal with a complaint. Take ownership of it. If the organ player's playing the wrong song, and you're dealing with the family, for God's sake, don't say, well, that's not our fault, it's the organ player. Just say, look, I'm really, really sorry. I'll deal with this. I recognise this is, take ownership of it. They don't want to hear, well, that's not our fault, it's theirs. Now, it's not your fault, it is theirs, but they don't want to hear that. So take ownership of it, manage expectations, under promise and over deliver. And there's a lot in here about not what you're saying, but how you're saying it. And whilst they might be really angry, and if you rise to their level of anger, then that becomes their grounds for the complaint. If you remain calm and say, I can't apologise enough. This is not what we're setting out to do. But if you bear with me, I'm going to do my best to rectify it. That's and sometimes that's all you can do.
Okay. We've had a number of points made about whether extra bearers required. John makes the point about the being sensitive during the arrangements. I mean, if the family volunteer that information, then that's helpful. Upon receiving the deceased into your care, that's a point at which to then raise the discussion. Some contracts include 6 bearers. Sean talks about having a policy regarding weights and discerning that when they come into the care. So there's some good discussions on this. Yeah.
And I do agree with what John Weir and Mark Jardine say. It might be insensitive at the time if you got a grieving family in front of you to say, right, okay, well, we can't move forward until you tell me how much you weigh. But there is some stuff in the middle here. So, for example, you could do a sliding scale of weights where you can say, okay, well, here's our price list for bodies that are up to 10 stone. We need at least four bearers. For 10 to 15 stone, we need 6, and for over 16 stone, we may need to look at more or alternative methods. So we're back to this thing about transparency and them knowing how this contract is going to play out, right? And I think once you then know, once you've got the weight, the body's with you or whatever, or they supplied it, you can then do these calculations and then let them know. The key to that complaint was they only found out on the day, so they turned up thinking it was going to be 4, it was 6, and then they got charged more. Okay, so it's just avoiding that last minute nasty surprise bit. So does that help?
That's good. That's good. Then there's some commentary about cremated remains, and John talks about taking that at the time of the arrangement in writing, and certainly when the ashes are released to the designated person, they're signed for. So you've got evidence of that. Daniel asks us the question about keeping ashes register. Which is good. Maria mentions about the BIE providing some information about embalming to inform clients. Okay, just going through the chat. I think that's the main points.
Craig talks about collection from the hospital.
Yes.
Cannot collect in this fashion without an early release form with the client's details, which means they've given consent. I mean, that's back to my point. You might be receiving a complaint where they signed that form and they've given that consent. It's just they either don't remember or they're not even thinking about that. And then suddenly, when they've got a little bit more clarity, and what you got to remember with vulnerability is it's not static. Vulnerability goes up and down like this, and you can be very vulnerable one day, and then, over time you get, not your faculties back. Everyone knows that, you're less vulnerable. So it might be that, they're very vulnerable when they sign that release form, and then afterwards, they get, after giving it a bit more thought and coming around a bit, they then start questioning what's going on. That's not unheard of. And I've dealt with consumers that swear blind that they haven't signed a document, and then oh yeah, well I did sign it, but I don't remember. Well, what do you say? What do you say to that?
Okay. Two other things I mentioned. One is that we have this office, Safe Business Centre, receives client complaints direct. Claire, could you just highlight what we do with those?
Yeah, so we do have a process when we get complaints in, and we do advise that they do need to go back to the funeral directors in the first instance to make sure that they can sort of get it resolved at that point. When they come in back into us, then there is a process that we obtain as much information as possible. We liaise with the funeral director. We do have funeral directors who don't wish to supply any additional further information, but when it comes to communication, then they wish to supply further. That may not get considered. So, as we said, there is a process that is followed, and it is there to support the members as well as the consumer.
Right. The other, so Ross also serves on the Professional Standards Committee when a complaint comes in. Ross, can you just give us a brief sketch of what you're looking to achieve as an adjudicator?
Yeah, I mean, if I could just take a step back and start with, we like complaints which you've tried to resolve before they've actually got to safe. So if you receive a complaint from a client or a member of the public or somebody you're dealing with, make sure it's in writing, get it in writing, hand it to a director in the business or somebody who hasn't been directly involved to take a view on it. Try to resolve the complaint before it grows into a beast. Now, what we say is, you feel free to ring Safe before it becomes a big complaint or before they pass it on to Safe as a formal complaint. Call the business centre. The business centre will put you in touch with one of us or a member of the executive to try and help you resolve it in the background before it gets passed to Safe as a sort of final stop. Communication really is key. Don't drag your feet with things. Try and assess it, review it, and write back to the complainant in a very, very timely fashion. And don't be afraid to put your neck out. I think as funeral directors, we all think we're the best thing since sliced bread, but at times we do make mistakes, and it's good to hold your hands up when you have made a mistake or a member of your staff has, and say, yes, we have made a mistake. We are sorry. This is what we're going to do to resolve it for you. and then put a plan in place going forward so nobody else ends up hopefully in that situation.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point that you make. And, you know, back to this thing about complaints, you know, I've got a database full of complaints against companies like John Lewis and Marks and Spencer. Doesn't mean they're bad businesses. It just means they're in business, right? And I'd be very, very worried if a business presented itself to me and said, well, we've never had any complaints. Never had any complaints, because that's just not how the world works. It doesn't mean that every complaint is justified, and it doesn't mean that people as humans don't make mistakes from time to time. The key to it is looking at them through the lens of they're actually valuable, and looking at it through the lens of, instead of being reactive to them and hoping they don't come through and then dealing with them when they do, being proactive and seeing what we can learn from them and what measures we can put in place for next time to try and avoid it. Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Philip, for what you presented today and some of your experience you've shared. We're really grateful. And we're looking forward to the assured partnership developing between SAFE and Bucks and Surrey. Can I just say thank you to Ross and for the work he does for us on standards, and for Claire and the team in the Safe Business Centre. If you do have any questions about this, do email in. And if you've got further questions, we can point you to Ross or to Philip or to Claire. Thank you so much. Until next time, take care.
Thank you.